Hello watch fans, it's Anders here on Watch On channel. Today a video that's a bit different from the videos I usually make here on the channel. Usually it's unboxings, watch reviews, collection videos, all of that stuff. But today I'm really trying to make a very different video just about collector types. What types of watch collectors do we meet, both here on YouTube, on Instagram and in real life of course, because you actually see a lot of different types of collectors. And the thing about collecting watches is that you start at one point and then you move on, and maybe 5 or 10 or 20 years later you are another kind of collector. So I really just wanted to once just use some of my university education to actually make a little more of a theoretic video about this, just very lightly. So I'm using the field theory of the French sociologist Bordieu. He died in 2002, and he made this field theory, which is a way to explain how regularities in individual action form as a result of one's position relative to others. My Bordieu field model in watches is much more simple. If we look at the top, we have the angry engineer. I will get into what these different watch collector types means. Then the opposite is the new enthusiast. If we look to the left, it's the perpetual flipper, and if we look to the right, the opposite of the perpetual flipper is the collector with a plan. So you see the poles are the different ways of being a collector. So the complete opposite almost to a collector with a plan is a perpetual flipper. The complete opposite to a new enthusiast is an angry engineer, and vice versa. So at the end of this video I'll also try to place 5 quite well-known YouTube watch reviewers in my Bordieu field model here, just for fun. I'm not trying to poke at anyone. Just remember, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, don't forget to subscribe. Also, it would be really funny if you could place yourself. I will also place myself in this model, so you can maybe in the comment write where you are placed in my model here. So if we start with the angry engineer, who is this type of watch collector? Well, this is a type of watch collector who is very much into the technical aspects of a watch. Like the guy who wrote when I did my unboxing video of my new Doxa watch, oh my god, it's not applied, it's printed numerals or it's printed hour markings, and that makes it a bad watch. So these types of collectors are extremely into the movement details, into the material details, into if it's a date window at that placement, if the crown does this and that, all of these different little details, and they are often very angry. So this is kind of in the extreme. You of course also see people who are much into details and movements, materials, if it's mineral crystal, sapphire crystal and stuff like that, who are not as angry. They are maybe moving a little towards the middle of my field here, my watch field. But at the most extreme, it's all the people who are writing in the comments, oh my god, how can you buy a watch at $1,500 if it's only a Celita movement, or it's not sapphire crystal, or I really hate that, or this and that. They are really angry, aggressive. So these types of collectors, they're not only into high-end watches, they will often be criticizing people who buy a Omega, for example, or a Grand Seiko, or a Rolex, or maybe a Tudor. So why do you pay $5,000 for a watch? You can get a great Orient or a great Seiko or a great microbrand for $300, and it's just as good almost. Remember, this is done with humor. This is a video for fun, so please don't send any death threats or anything. So at the opposite, we have the new enthusiast, and this is of course self-explanatory almost. It's the guys, the people who are getting into watch collecting now, so they are really enthusiast. They are looking at a lot of watches. It's just like opening the door to a completely new world. And what we often see is that these types of collectors, they are very much into the lower tiers of brands, and especially the Seiko watches, especially the more affordable Seiko watches. I place them in the same category just at the opposite pole as the angry engineer, because at some points they are actually quite equal. You can get a really good Seiko for $400, so why pay $5,000 for a Breguet, or pay $10,000 for a Breguet, or why pay $4,000 for a Tudor and stuff like that? So the new enthusiast, they will buy a lot of watches. A lot of watches will go through. I remember how I was when I first got into watch collecting. I was very much a new enthusiast. I bought a lot of watches, and they will look into Seiko, Orient, a lot of microbrands. They will buy a lot of microbrand watches. Later on, they will become much more of a collector with a plan. They will also maybe move towards the field between angry engineer and collector with a plan, but at the beginning they will buy a lot of those brands. They will maybe move on to Tag Heuer, Oris, Breitling. They are kind of the opposite to the angry engineer, because they are just buying all of these very affordable watches just because they are really enthusiastic with collecting. So if we look at the other side of this field, we have the perpetual flipper. This is a collector who is very much in line with the new enthusiast, in the sense that new enthusiasts, they will start to flip a lot of watches to actually gain new watches, and maybe they will flip and move towards more expensive or higher end watches in the tiers of watches. But the perpetual flipper can also be a very experienced collector. It's just the type of collector who is always flipping watches, always, buying an Omega, a Nomos, an Oris, a Zenith, an IWC or something like that, even Rolex and Grand Seiko, and then they are maybe just enjoying this watch for 3 or 4 or 5 months, and then they are selling. And just try to think about 2 quite big American YouTubers who are perpetual flippers, because I think they are very much archetypes of this person, but moving towards also the collector with a plan and the angry engineer. So I'll reveal that later in the video who I'm thinking about. So the perpetual flipper can be a seasoned watch collector, but it's not a collector with a plan. It's a collector who is always selling watches to buy new watches, trading watches, flipping watches all the time. The collection of a perpetual flipper is never kind of a static thing. It's always a dynamic thing. You can never really get a big attachment to a watch. What happens in the head with these perpetual flippers is that they will very easily fall in love with a watch. They will feel a lot of joy and love toward this watch. They will be very enthusiastic about this new watch, but in just a week or 2 or 3 or a month, they will start to actually lose interest in the watch, and then they will flip it to get that feeling again. So it's kind of like smoking, you need the next fix. So at the opposite pole, you have the collector with a plan. So this is much less about emotions. It's much more about having a plan, having a rational thought about your collection. The collector with a plan will actually make a plan. They will save money. They will make a plan to buy the first Zenith. Then the next watch will be a Breguet or a Rolex or an Audemars Piguet or something like that. They will have a plan. Maybe the plan is 10 or 20 years. They will know, if I save this amount of money every month, I will be able to buy my next watch. They have already laid out their collection. Maybe they actually made a plan of having a collection of only maybe 6 watches, and then they will start to actually move towards getting these watches, and they will be very conscious about they need a sports watch, a dress watch, a dive watch, a chronograph and stuff like that. Very collector with a plan. These types of people, they have usually been new enthusiasts. They have been perpetual flippers, but they have now aged and matured with watch collecting and moved much more towards having a plan or long-term plan to get the perfect collection. They will also be people who know that these are exactly the watches that they want. And collectors with a plan can move towards angry engineer state, because they are of course very conscious about what all the features and the qualities are with their watch. They will also be looking into having different types of movements. They will also be looking into having different types of materials. So why did I place the watches like this? I just tried to place the brands kind of in the fields where they are most relevant. So if you look at a collector with a plan, and he or she shares the field with the angry engineer, you will definitely place a brand like Breguet. Breguet is not a huge brand. if you look at new enthusiasts or perpetual flippers, it's more of a seasoned collector brand. So if you're really into watches, if you're really into the history, which is something that angry engineers and collectors with a plan are very often into, especially angry engineers, they will say that Seiko have a beautiful history, so Seiko are just as good as a Rolex, for example, the most extreme of them. If you look at them, they will of course look into Breguet having this amazing history. They will also look into Breguet's dials, the materials, the in-house movements and stuff like that. That's the same that the collector with a plan would look into. So Breguet is very much a angry engineer brand, but they're also a brand for the seasoned collector with a plan. I actually also place Grand Seiko here, mostly because Grand Seiko is towards the angry engineer. This is a brand which is perfect for the angry engineer. Look at how amazing the technology is with the movements. Look at the Zaratsu finishing. Grand Seiko is just an amazing brand from an engineering standpoint, so they will very often be very much in love with Grand Seiko. I think most collectors with a plan, they will want a Rolex. A lot of collectors with a plan, seasoned collectors, they are actually collecting only Rolex. So you see a lot of these Hodinkee videos, they are only collecting the same, almost the same model of Rolex. We need 25 different Submariners because it's different reference numbers and stuff like that. So I placed Rolex here, but Rolex can of course also be a little towards the perpetual flipper, the more seasoned perpetual flipper, because the more seasoned perpetual flipper would buy an Air King, enjoy the Air King for 6 months and flip it towards another watch. So if we look at the new enthusiast and the collector with a plan, the field you see there, you see brands like IWC, Zenith and Tudor. Maybe Zenith is more of a seasoned collector brand, but I think they are kind of moving also into the territory just below Rolex, just below Breguet, for example. So they will maybe look into getting a IWC or maybe get into having a Tudor as their first high-end Swiss luxury watch. But this is also watch brands with a lot of models in their collection that the collector with a plan would want to look into. And the reason why I, for example, placed IWC further towards the collector with a plan as well as Zenith is because these are brands that the collector with a plan would love to have in his collection. Glashütte Original and Nomos are kind of more specialized brands, so I don't think this is the new watch collector, new enthusiast first choice. But an Omega, maybe an Omega Seamaster could be a watch brand they will move towards when they want to get their first luxury watch. If you look at the perpetual flipper and the angry engineer, they will maybe move towards a Glashütte Original CQ, for example. They will flip it. After a while, the angry engineer will buy the Glashütte and keep the Glashütte because they will talk about how amazing the Glashütte Original movements are. It's very individual. This is just how I see it. This is how I experience it with a lot of people on Instagram, YouTube and the forums. So I hope you catch my drift. Where will I place myself? As I said before, I started as a new enthusiast several years ago and I was buying Seiko and Orient and Tag Heuer and all of these brands all over the place until I had enough money to get a Rolex. I still have this Rolex, so I'm not a perpetual flipper, but I still am. I'm kind of a perpetual flipper. I'm kind of a two-faced Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde watch collector, and that's because of my YouTube channel. Because I have two collections. I have my steady collection. As you can see, 2 times a year I make a state of the collection. You will see I have some timepieces. They have been with me always and they will always be with me. So I have kind of a two-faced way of collecting watches. My steady collection, which are the watches collector with a plan type of collection, and of course also the perpetual flipper, because I need to have watches coming in and out to actually have content, to have items to review and feature on my YouTube channel. So now think about how you will place yourself, or think about how you will place your own watch collecting journey in this Bordieu field. So let me place 5 different YouTubers, and this is not to scorn anybody, it's not to start any dispute. I don't really care about all of that stuff, it's for children. I just really think it is how I look at these guys. And the first is of course TGV. He started very much at the new enthusiast. So he started with a lot of Seikos, he still has a lot of Seikos, and for a long time he was always talking about Seiko, how the Seiko SKX is like a great watch and stuff like that. But he moved towards an Oris, and then he moved towards collector with a plan. But I never really think he's a collector with a plan. He will always talk about this and that watch he wants and this and that grail, and it's not a grail just maybe 6 or 12 months later. But he still has kind of a core collection, so I definitely would place him at the collector with a plan as well. So he's kind of two-faced just like me. So the American YouTuber Bruce Williams, I will definitely place him at the perpetual flipper. He even says this. He's always flipping watches. He got a Vacheron Constantin. Overseas, it was his grail, amazing watch. He decided to sell it maybe a year later to maybe earn $1,000. This is not a collector with a plan. This is very, very much kind of in the field of new enthusiast, perpetual flipper, just with a little more money. So you're not buying Seikos or Tag Heuers all the time. You're moving towards actually buying a Zenith, a Glashütte, Omega, Grand Seiko, Rolex and stuff like that. Very much in the perpetual flipper, and this not only just because of his channel. He is a perpetual flipper, he says it. I believe the perpetual flipper, just like Bruce Williams, it could easily be collecting something else. If you just look at the London watch collector, he is very much a collector with a plan. He's collecting Patek Philippe, Rolex, all of these amazing brands. But for me, I think he's kind of much more placed with between the new enthusiast and the perpetual flipper, or at least the collector with a plan and a new enthusiast. And the deal with him is that he has a lot of money somehow, so he can actually be kind of a new enthusiast, but instead of buying an Orient or Seiko or a microbrand, he's paying like $20,000 for a Rolex or $30,000 for an Audemars Piguet. So he's just a new enthusiast, a collector with a lot of money, but he's not a collector with a plan. If I wanted to place him, I don't know the guy, it's just from watching his video. So let's move over to the States again, and this is actually the friend of Bruce Williams. This is Random Rob. He's very, very much a perpetual flipper. He's very much almost to the complete pole of perpetual flipper, but moving upwards in the brand. So he's not just flipping Seikos all the time, although he is. He got a Rolex, he got an Omega, but he flipped the Omega, and that's a completely perpetual flipper. He's very much in vein with Bruce Williams. They don't really attach a lot of emotion or planning or long-term ideas with the watches. It's just getting a lot of watches in, experience the watch, get it, move it on, get a new watch. So very much a perpetual flipper. They are very much in the same vein. Nothing is sacred. They will always be selling and flipping watches, and that's just perfectly fine if that's how you enjoy watches. Who really should care? The fifth and last YouTuber I will place is a YouTuber who unfortunately doesn't make too many videos anymore, but this is Amin Reviews, and he is very much a collector with a plan. This is very conscious, this is very planned, this is very, very much a thought thing. He's really just thinking about how to move his collection. So if you look at his videos, he's kind of building a collection with some very nice brands, but a lot of different types of watches. So like I started the video saying, he's kind of the collector who is actually making a collection with the right types of watches. You need a diver, you need a dress watch, you need a chronograph and stuff like that. Also looking at materials, also looking at straps and movements. He's very interested in movements as well. So he's looking into also having a collection with different types of movements. And for me, Amin Reviews, he's very much one of the most typical collectors with a plan in this Bordieu field, but also a collector with a plan because he is really conscious about it and he makes no mistake about it. He's collecting with a plan. Think about where you would place yourself maybe 5 years ago and now, or 10 years ago and now. Where will you move towards? Are the brands really placed in the right fields here? Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.